Hi everyone, welcome back to Revit. Today we're going to be doing sketch modifiable elements like walls, floors, and roofs, and then move on to some components like windows and doors. So you've already gotten a little bit of a crash course in how to draw some of this stuff. We're just going to go into a little bit more detail on how these things are edited. So what I've got to start is a 20 by 20 grid and some levels set at 10 feet apart. So you can set those to whatever dimensions you like, but we're going to get started at the architecture tab, wall architectural. If you come over here to the top, you can see that you have a height constraint of 1, 2, 3, 4 are unconnected. This just means if you connect it to a level, it will associate the wall's height with that level. You can offset from that level to kind of start to manipulate the height there, but anytime that level moves, that wall will change its height as well. Or you can set it to unconnected, where it maintains a set height that you give it. So I'm going to leave it as unconnected at 20 feet. I'm going to look at the location line. This is how Revit kind of registers where in space the wall actually is. And then if anything changes in the wall, like the thickness of it, that's how it determines where that new thickness goes. So like if I started with an 8-inch wall and then it changed to 12-inch, like where are those extra 4 inches going? That's how Revit determines which direction. So we'll look at that in a little bit later. And then the chain command, you've seen that Revit kind of chains walls together if you leave this on. So if you turn it off, it just kind of lets you start and stop as you like, which can be kind of handy if you know that you don't want to chain stuff together. You can avoid that extra button push of hitting escape. So I'm just going to delete those. I'm going to turn that back on. Offset's pretty straightforward. If you set your offset to something like 2 feet and you've got your object here, you can hit the space bar to switch which side is going to offset that object, but it'll just set it 2 feet off, or whatever distance you set that offset to. Okay, well, let's open the wall tool back up again. Radius, if you have your chain on and you have a radius set on your walls, it will automatically fillet those walls together, which is an interesting joinery type. And like if you already know that it's going to be filleted, it's just something you don't have to do later. Join status, I wouldn't mess with this because it can get a little messy. Basically, if you're telling the computer whether or not you want your corners of walls that come together to actually join together into one wall system. So I'll show you an example. If I hit disallow and my chain is still on, so it let me chain those walls and draw them all as one kind of command, but it didn't join these together. It gets a little wonky. So leave your join status on allow unless you know precisely what you're doing. All right. Okay. Sorry, computer's lagging a little bit, so the zoom's a little funny. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my wall tool. I'm going to set this to 20 feet. I'm going to keep the wall center line as my location line. I'm going to leave chain on, offset will be 0. So you can see that these walls are all snapping to these grid lines. And that's where kind of like the offsets and everything kind of come into play, where, you know, if this is your structural grid and your walls aren't structural, you can automatically set those offsets. And then I'm just going to create like a simple shape here. So once you've got this, if you want to go ahead and look in your elevation, you can see it's all 20 feet high. You can use these arrows to start to change it. You can see it changing over here with this temporary dimension. That just edited one wall. So you can see in level 1, just that one wall was selected. If I go back to that same elevation, I can hit Control Z. It goes back to 20 feet. If I hit Tab, it will select all of the walls. If you ever have any like issues selecting objects in Revit, because maybe there's like multiple things kind of on top of each other, if you hover over it and hit tab, it will cycle through the options. Kind of like whenever you select things that are on top of each other in Rhino and it gives you that list that you can select from, you just tab through it automatically, or kind of before you're able to select anything in Revit. So I hit tab and then click select to select all of them. And then I can start to change the unconnected height to like 24 feet over here and hit apply, and it changes all of them. So I'm going to hit Control Z. Now they're all back to 20 feet. I'm going to go back to my level 1 because we're going to start talking about wall types and families. So we've got this basic wall, and you can come over here you can see it's in the basic wall family. There's two other families. There's curtain wall and stacked wall. Stacked wall is where the material will change as the wall increases in height. So if you've got like a layer of stone and then a layer of brick and then maybe you've got some sort of wood finish on the top, I don't know what you're doing, you would use a stacked wall for that rather than like building separate walls on top of each other in Revit, because that starts to confuse the system. You've also got your curtain walls, which I'm sure you all are familiar with what they are. They keep them as a separate family so that because they have different kind of parameters that are required to build them in Revit. And then all of the other kind of wall types that are consistent vertically but change as you move through them, like in their construction layers, are all here on the basic wall. So the generic 8-inch wall, close that. If you hit edit type right here, you can see more of its properties. So you can see it's got some wrapping settings for how it deals with joints. It's got some graphic settings that you can start to mess with if you like. If you go into structure here, if you hit edit, you can see what it's made out of. So that's why it's a generic 8-inch wall, is they just give it a generic kind of material. And that's so that you can just lay things out and really just sketch in Revit. You can come in and you can start to change. If you hit by category and then the little ellipsis, you can start to change these materials. I will say be careful with this, because if you change this in the basic generic 8-inch wall, it could start to mess with some of your other projects. And then also if you only have one instance of a wall that you want changed and you change this type that you've got open here, because it says type properties, it will change all instances of that type in the project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reselect this wall. I'm going to go to edit type, and then I'll duplicate, name it custom, whatever you like, and then I'm going to start to mess with this structure. So if I decide that I want some sort of whatever material I like, I'm just going to look for glass. You would never want glass inside of your wall, but you can go ahead and set that up, and then it'll let you do that. And then if you actually can, you can come in and change this thickness, like if I want it to be 12 inches. And then you can see that that wall changes. But this one, all of these others, because they're a different wall type, stay the same. I can come in, select all of these using the tab command, and change them all at once. And then because their location lines were all set to wall center line, they just kind of offset off of that center line whenever they changed in scale. So there we go. And then we can start to actually assign these different things like interior and exterior walls. So if you have the brick and CMU and metal stud, you can see all of these different layers are kind of coming in. And you can go into, let's go to the north elevation. You can see that there's all of this stuff going on, but you can't see it. So that's because your brick is facing the inside. So we can just switch that right there. That location line is where that rotation or that mirroring is going to happen. So if I had the location line, for example, set to finish face exterior, it's going to flip along that exterior finish face. So I'm going to set that back to wall center line, and we can see all of this bricks kind of coming out here. So then we can go in, we can change all of these to the same thing. We can just switch all of these around. Alright, so now that I've got kind of my exterior wall set up, I'm going to go in and do my interior walls as well. So I'm going to come in and choose an interior. Let's just do a 5-inch partition. And I'm going to change that to a finished face exterior because I'm concerned with like the distance between walls, not from the center, but like between the actual finished faces. So as you can see, because the location line is to the exterior, it's going to go on one side or the other. You can hit spacebar and that'll change it automatically. And then I can come over here. And you can see that because the join status is on, these walls are automatically joining together. And then I can kind of come in, go to the midpoint, do that again. I can come over here. And, you know, you can always just switch that with the space bar. Switch that with the space bar. So that was an example of what happens when these walls join. Nope, those walls joined. Sometimes you kind of have to look in here. The display settings can kind of get a little crazy. So anytime you're worried about something not joining together, just kind of go in there, and you can use that wall join command to edit that if you're ever wanting to change it. And then I'm going to kind of come in, a couple more walls, and I'm satisfied with that. So you can see where I'll just show you really quickly with this different kind of finished face exterior what happens when you start to change it. So that one actually will offset from that location line that way rather than it going both ways with the center line. And we'll kind of switch that back here. All right, so now that we've got our walls laid out, we're going to move on to the floor. So we're going to go to floor or architectural, and you've gotten kind of a crash course on this already. But what's interesting when you start to combine these is that your floor can be associated with these walls the way that your walls can be associated with levels. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to pick lines. We'll go to this exterior line. And it can be a little tricky just because you've got all of these different lines kind of on top of each other. So if you ever just want to use that tab command again, you can do that. And it just kind of cycles through all of the options that you have. So if I clicked all of them, it automatically goes to the center line of each of those walls. So for the sake of time, we're just going to go with that one. So you can see that it's tracing all of that. Yes. So then if we go into our 3D view, you can see where it's kind of sitting underneath all of those walls and it's going along that center line. If you ever want to edit that, you can just double click. You can drag these lines and edit them pretty readily. So you can see that it comes all the way flush right here versus it being offset over here. If you ever need to create a floor with a slope, which, you know, it's not super common, but could come up with some of these projects that you're going to be doing here in the future, you can go to your edit boundary again, and you can add a slope arrow. So you then, here, let's go back into our floor plan. If you have a slope arrow, you can draw it here, where you can specify the level at the tail or the level at the head. The tail is going to be the higher point in this case. And if you kind of set this one to -1, and then you hit apply, you go to your 3D view, you can see that that floor is then sloping down along that arrow. And you can start to combine slope arrows to do a lot of different kind of complex geometries. We're just going to undo that because we don't need a sloped floor. You can also use different kind of points to change the heights and everything of your floors and how they slope. You can also add split lines, and you can associate it with specific supports. We're not going to worry about that too much right there. If you do hover over these, you can get a quick little tutorial, which is super helpful. So we've got our floor set up, and the same way that we can modify the wall types, we can modify the floor type. So, you know, if you've got steel bar joist over concrete, it'll automatically change those settings. And you can also go in and edit those types yourself. Just remember that if you go in and you edit it, you are editing that entire type, and so anything that's set to that type will start to change as well. So just kind of being careful about that. But if we want to go ahead and duplicate that, just for the sake of investigation, we can come in here, we can edit it, we can change this structure kind of thickness. Like maybe we want it to be like an inch instead of an eighth, and then we want like 4 inches of concrete instead. So then it changes that, and you can see that depth change again. So that kind of pipe editing can be applied to just about anything in Revit. It's fairly straightforward, and it's actually pretty simple to do, as long as simple to do within kind of these different parameters. Sometimes it does get a little bit complex, but that's really not what you need to worry about right now. All right, so the next thing is duplicating your floors. So you can draw each of your floors on each level like we did just now, but what you can also do is we can hit copy to clipboard, and then we can come over here to paste, and then we can align to selected levels. We can select levels 2 and 3, and then it automatically copies that same floor plate. So then you can kind of get into like editing each one as far as like where it hits the wall. And then we also don't want to set our floors, so we're going to delete that one. But you can see how it comes through automatically. And then this is where we kind of start to play with the wall connections, as far as like this one goes up to level 2, but because the floor is also at level 2, you can start to see the wall through the floor. So we can come in, we can adjust that offset, maybe like -6 inches, and you can see that it's disappeared. But if we go into the, like maybe the level 2 floor plan, we can we can go to view, and then section. We can draw a section through there, hit escape, double click on the head, and then you can see kind of the difference between that wall that has the vertical offset and this wall that doesn't. You can also attach the top or the base, and it'll come up right here. You can either hit the top of the base, we're going to hit it with top, and we can attach it to that floor, and it'll automatically end at the floor, the same way that like attaching walls to levels changes, where it can associate. You can start to move that floor around, and that wall will change its height versus this one that remains at level 2. So then now that we've got our floors, let's do some windows. So we can do level 2 or level 1. I'm going to go ahead and hide this guy just because, no. Okay, I'm just gonna, he's not gonna go away. All right, well, we'll just leave him there. If we come into the door tool, you can see that it comes up with a door already ready to be placed. You can come in and you can change this, just like you can change your wall type. Right now, this is the only one that's loaded, so that's the one we're going to work with. 36 by 80 inch door. They have to be placed into walls. So if you can see, like if I'm out here in the field, nothing's going to show up, but if I put it next to a wall, it'll start to place. You get like the little temporary dimensions that show you where it's going to go according to these wall center lines. As you are placing it, if you go toward one side of the wall, the door is going to open that way. And then if you hit the space bar, it changes which way it swings. So if I place that, it automatically cuts out that opening from the wall and then places the door where I need it to be. So we're just going to place a couple more doors kind of here, 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 and here. So then once we've got the doors placed, you can always go back and edit this type the same way we edit a wall. you can come in, you can change all of your dimensions. Just remember the same way that like if you edit this type, that type is permanently edited and it's going to change any instances of that type in the project. So just always remembering to duplicate before you start editing things. So this is, you can start to flip these around even after you've placed them. You can also just hit the space bar when they're selected to kind of cycle through those options if you're just kind of checking out what you want to know. And then you can also start to, if you have these temporary dimensions here and you want to figure out what this distance is from the edge of the door to the wall, then you can click these right here, these dimensions. They start to move around that object. So yeah, it goes all the way to the other side and you can head it back to the center line. And if you decide you want some like different alignments, you can actually constrain some of these objects. Control, you can select them both. You hit align, and you hit the first one, and then you hit what point on the second one you want to align to that first one. And these were already pretty close, so they didn't move. But if you do this one, and these two are clearly not aligned, the second one's going to move, and you can actually, if you go in and align those, you can lock that, and then you can do this next one and also lock that to where if you move one of these, they all move together. So that can come in handy when you've got like a particular kind of set of objects. These can also be applied to windows, which we'll see in just a second, about keeping them aligned even when you have to like change locations or maybe walls start to move around. So then we will do the same thing with some windows because they're actually very similar. So you can drop down, there's a few more loaded kind of and at the offset that we can work with. So we've got these different sizes of fixed windows that we can place, and Prof is automatically kind of aligning to that center line of the window. We can come in and we can change that to like a double casement, and then we can come in and do something like this. So the same way that you can mess around with the way that the door is swinging, you can change which side of the wall that sill is on. If you come over here to these operable windows, you will also be changing which way the windows will be swinging. So if we come into our elevation, let's do our east elevation because we got a couple windows right here. And we're looking at this. We can start to change the, without changing the level, we can start to move the sill height. Moving that up, the sill height changes. We can also just set it to a number and it will move. Let's do something a little bit more dramatic. Yeah, so it'll start to move around based on like these different sill height settings that you've got. And then if we decide we want to change the type, we can duplicate it. We can start to change these dimensions. And then it automatically changes that. And so then I can just change this one to that wall type or that window type, and then it automatically changes those dimensions. Also, if you decided that you wanted to change all of the instances of this window into instances of this window, you can right click, you can select all instances. You can either choose visible in view or in the entire project. And this is going to be based on like instance by instance as far as like which one you want to choose. I'm going to go ahead and go with entire project, and we're going to go to a 3D view just for the sake of seeing it. and rotate it. So there aren't any other instances in this project, but what we can do is we can go over to this one, select all instances in entire project, and it automatically selects that other one. And I can change it to this custom one that we wanted. And it automatically changes all of them. And it also, but it maintains those location settings like the sill height that we had in the original settings for that instance. It doesn't change it to like anything lower or higher like we had on the other ones, unless that was part of the type property. And then we can also do the similar process where we select these. We can do copy to clipboard, align to selected levels, sure save the project. We can do level 2, and it automatically copies those into the wall. All right, so then we're gonna finish off with a roof, so you can close up your building. And so we're gonna go over to architecture and then the roof. You can do roof by footprint or roof by extrusion. Roof by footprint, because we've got like the level 1 selected, we need to switch it to level 3 so that we're not building a roof on the ground. And then we can select lines. You can also select the offset, so if you know you're going to have an overhang, you can go ahead and set that right there. And the define slope key, we're going to talk about here in a second once we get this drawn. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to hover over this, hit tab until I select all of these, and then it just automatically creates that outline. These little triangle guys are kind of going with that define slope key. So the slope is going to act perpendicularly to that line. And just to show you what I mean, for now we're going to say no to that, is like if this wall defines slope, that slope's going to move perpendicular to that. So basically, if all of them are selected, you make this lovely hip roof form. You can always go back in and change that, where if you do that, and then you can uncheck define slope, hit OK again, you can see how this no longer defines the slope, and therefore everything that did define the slope is going to be moving toward that. So we can go in, we can hit all of these and say that none of them define the slope. And it just creates this flat roof. And what I did there with attaching the walls to the roof, which you can edit as well, you can, just like when we attach things to levels, you can move this roof around and those walls automatically extend. So the last edit that we're going to kind of talk about with the walls, if we can fan, is editing the wall profile. So you can actually edit these wall profiles the same way that you can edit the roof and the floor profile. So if I double click on this wall, that's what I was talking about with the attachment to the roof and the floor. Editing that profile, this joins it from those things to where you can only change it, when it becomes something that you have to manually change. So, but if we come in, we can take that corner, we can draw a line across it, and we can use our trim tool. And the trim tool in Revit is a little bit weird. You pick what you want to keep. So like over here, I would pick this one and that one, and it takes away the point I don't want to keep. So if I do that, it's going to give me an error message. I know what I'm trying to do here, so I just hit unjoin elements, and then that automatically changes that wall profile. So if I hit undo, and instead of putting that opening at the top, I decide I want to just kind of put a big opening here in the middle, it'll just put that big opening here in the middle. We can take that out, and let's say that the reason you wanted that opening is because you wanted a curtain wall. Instead of changing that wall profile, you can actually just nest the curtain wall right into it, which is pretty cool if you ask me. So you can come over here to wall, you can go over to, let's just use a storefront for now. We're on the level 2 floor plan. We can just come right in here and draw that in, and you can see it automatically nests that curtain wall right in there. So if we go back to the 3D view, you can see that this wall had some different wall height constraints. So we can come in, if you see the dashed lines, you're actually selecting that whole wall versus just a mullion. So we're going to select the whole thing. We're going to go up to level 3 and hit apply. Yeah, so then we can start to change it, and then we can also start to change its base point and top point. And the mullions, according to the grid settings, will automatically update. So we could also bring this up and bring this down. Right. So there's one last thing that we're going to cover on this tutorial. It's stairs. Since we've got multiple levels and floors here, it would be good to know how to connect them. So we're going to go to the level 1 floor plan, architecture, and then go right here to stair. And so we've got a few options that Revit will start us out with. We've got kind of this type of the 7 by 11, and we can go in and we can edit that type to try and change the riser height and the tread depth and everything like that. So we're just going to stick with what Revit has default for us. We're not going to worry about sketching any custom stairs or messing with that, because that gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, and you don't really need to know that right now. But we've got a couple ways we can do this. We can just do a straight run, which, like, if I wanted to change my location line, same way we can change the location line on a wall to exterior support right, I can just put this along this wall. And you can see when I did that Revit, if I go back to run and I hit this, no, not on the center line. Revit automatically kind of calculates how many risers I need total, how many I've made, and how many I need to make in the future. So if I just decide to do this full run, then I've made all of them. And I can hit done. I can go into my 3D view. I can rotate this. Hang on, let me remember how to pan. There we go. Alright, now we're going to X out of that. We'll zoom in right here. We can go to hide element, and you can see that stair right there. So before we worry about cutting that open, we're going to go back to level 1. We're going to talk about how we do a switchback. So you can do the same thing where it's an exterior support right. I'm going to switch, and we're just going to put this right next to the other one. We're going to hit here, and then we'll go up about 9 risers, and we'll click it again, and then we'll move over to this other side and line right up, and then we'll go over here, and Revit automatically creates that landing for us where we need it. And then we can edit these, we can move them around, we can make them a little bit shorter, and if we use that little triangle that I'm clicking on right now, and we make it shorter, it will actually add those risers that we need to the other side. So let's kind of just set that back to where it was. We can make this a little bit more even. And those are the kind of the different stairs that you're able to make. If we go to our 3D view, you can see that they're running into the floor. So we'll kind of finish that. And you can either edit, since we've got just one floor above, it makes a lot more sense just kind of edit an opening around these. So you can actually do that pretty quickly by using the pick line tool. So I'm just going to pick these lines that are kind of associated with the stair. And then use my trim extend. And then I can use a split. And just gonna cut that, and then here would be that opening. And I can do the same thing with the other one. But we're going to leave that there for now. We're going to hit yes to attach those walls to the floor's bottom. And so you can see that you've got that one instance. But say you wanted this stair to go all the way to the roof for whatever reason, or if you had a multiple floors that stair had to cut through. You can also do it with a shaft. So I'm going to go to level 1. I'm going to hit shaft, save the project, sure. And I'm just going to do the same thing with a pick line tool and pick these exterior lines associated with the stair. These get dashed in because they're like above that plane that they use to cut the floor plan. So it's just a graphic technique. You can change that at your leisure. I'm going to make that square and close. And you can see that it's basically like a Boolean difference. You're just cutting this volume out of everything. You can edit it with these little triangle guys, or you can give it some you can give it some constraints. So if you go up to like level 4, you can set the base offset to 0. Yeah, you can see that it'll cut all the way through. And the shaft can be used for, it doesn't have to only be used for stairs, it can be used to cut anything. It's just really handy for stairs. So these should be all of the kind of skills you need to get started, just understanding how to go in and edit types and families. If you want, we can go ahead and reset that temporary hide so then you can see what we have, just understanding like how to select everything. So good luck, guys. Have fun in Revit. You can do a lot of cool things. Bye.